No es coincidencia, el mayor defensor del embargo en contra de Cuba es un gran corrupto.
Sure, yeah, he's a Democratic senator, and he has led up this committee on Cuba that has labeled Cuba as a terrorist state, labeled Cuba as corrupt, done all these things, and said we cannot alleviate the embargo. He's been one of the main senators spearheading the illegal criminal embargo on the people of Cuba. But recently, he was caught in this huge corruption case, and I believe it was Egypt. His house was raided, and he was taking huge stacks of cash, and he even had huge lumps of gold, which he's now admitted were just for personal use, for personal spending. And of course, that's a government that has had a lot of human rights abuses, a lot of things that, you know, if they were happening in Cuba, he would freak out about it and say, see, this is why we need the embargo. So it just shows the hypocrisy that this is the guy leading up the embargo against Cuba, calling them a state, while he's corrupt and taking money and gold from a country that's far more authoritarian than Cuba's ever been.
Isn't Menéndez of Cuban heritage?
I believe he is. He's what we would call a gusano.
Yeah. People have to come up to the conclusion of why did embargoes took place in the first place. The US is saying we don't want authoritarian regimes to take place in Latin America, so we're going to put an embargo as a soft power measure not to initiate a war in order to tear down the violence. But also at the same time, they say they don't want a socialist government to be in power, because socialism doesn't work. So they have to choose one of the two. Either socialism doesn't work, or we need to stop socialism with embargo. Because if you say both, you're very dumb. If you as a listener, if you believe both, then you are dumb. You cannot say that. Either socialism is unviable, you know, like von Mises saying like the fatal arrogance of the socialist calculation, which is a very stupid book that I read and I promised myself never to read again. Yes, the socialist calculation is not only viable, but it's still present. And every company on earth makes calculation on demand. It's called forecast. We do forecast all the time. We are planning the economies all the time, every day. And today, artificial intelligence is planning the economy. So we live in planned economies. The difference is that the planned economies are working into the interest of capital and not into the interest of human being. That is the fundamental difference. That is what Deng Xiaoping meant when he said that it doesn't matter if the cat is white or black, as long as it is hunting mice. That is the difference between how we take place into planned economies. So we know socialism is not only viable, but desirable. Clearly, what they're doing with the embargoes is that they're transforming something that is viable and desirable into a public nightmare. And they're instrumentalizing this public nightmare as a recurring propaganda, almost as a piece of advertisement to sell people out of this notion that there are alternatives to socio-economical formations and that they are desirable. And they're probably better than what we have seen so far.
Absolutely. And that's why I think it's so important for the U.S. to keep the embargo on Cuba, because they're in the Western Hemisphere. They're right under our nose. So if people see that socialism doesn't fail every time it's tried, that it does work, the U.S. loses a big propaganda point. But like you said, if socialism fails every time, why do you need an embargo? Why can't you just let it fail? But that's given the U.S. unprecedented power financially on the global stage, and there are thousands of subsidiary banks that come off of that. So it's very difficult for countries who overthrow their capitalist class to survive and advance their productive forces with that U.S.-dominated global financial system that then cuts them off from financing and trade. And that's why what China's doing with BRICS and forming these trade partnerships based on mutual development and complete non-interventionism is such a brilliant counter to what the U.S. has done for years with the global financial system.
And also, like, the cherry on the cake is that the guy that is the gusano trader of his own patria, it's now proved to be an unjust, unfair, lying scumbag, like corrupt. Of course, and it only makes sense. I think in the way you have to be this self-centered, narcissistic, egoistic trader in order to be evil enough to betray your own people, your own community in the interest of somebody else. This is like the perfect conclusion to what type of people will actually advocate for the continuance of an embargo that is just imposing pain, violence, and suffering on people that have absolutely no need for that type of behavior.